Good morning and welcome to Making the Grade. I'm Michelle Edmonds from Idaho News 6. So nice to have you with us this morning. Of course, we are live at this moment, and that means if you have an education-based question, we want to hear from you. What are you thinking about what's happening in the world of education right now, whether you be a parent, a student, a teacher, an administrator, or someone just looking in from the outside at what is happening? We're going to be covering a lot of topics today, and here to do that with me, as always, Kevin Richert from Idaho Education News. Good morning, Kevin.
Hi, Michelle. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's kind of exciting. You and I were talking before we jumped on here to see what was announced yesterday with the vaccine rollout. It is only going to help make sure that kids are back in school full time to get more people vaccinated, correct?
It's going to help with kids. It's also going to help in the higher education community. We've talked about this before, how college professors and staff weren't brought in one of those early groups. K-12 teachers, K-12 staff, they were able to start to get the vaccine as early as January. Not so in the higher education community. So as we move into this more of a general population rollout, kind of based on age and based on health conditions, that's going to start to pick up higher education staff. It's going to start to pick up higher education professors, older non-traditional students as well. But as you ratchet down and you make your way through the general population, that's going to start to affect the college and university campuses as well.
Good news for everybody, most definitely.
Yes.
And just real quickly, I know numbers have continued to be rather steady for the most part when we're talking about coronavirus case numbers, both at the K through 12 level and on the campus level. There was one spike, though, that you wrote about earlier this week was it the University of Idaho that had the
Yes,
spike?
it was. Yeah, they had a fairly significant increase in cases. I think they reported 61 cases for the period ending early part of last week. And that was up from like 4 cases the week before. So yes, a very significant increase. University officials feel like that was tied to some off-campus housing, a couple of Greek housing units. Yeah, and it comes just as the University of Idaho is heading into spring break. I think their spring break is next week. So they're encouraging students to get tested before they leave town for spring break. And I believe students then have to be tested before they go back into face-to-face learning on March 22nd. So a fairly significant spike there. On most other campuses, cases more or less stable, some increases, some decreases, but nothing terribly out of the ordinary.
Of course, you're listening to Making the Grade if you're just joining us live here at Idaho News 6 on our Facebook page or later on any of our social media platforms. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a college student who's out there, are they coming home for spring break? What are they doing? Let us know what's happening in your house. And if your kids are back in school or if they're headed back to school soon, in whatever form that is, we'd love to hear from you. Kevin, let's jump in on the big election day yesterday, because of course we tend to cover bond and levy elections because they are such a huge source of revenue for our school systems all across the state of Idaho. And yesterday, it was a massive amount of money that was on the table for school districts. Break it down for us.
Yeah, really big day for school elections across the state. And it's kind of a hopscotch. So if you're a patron in the West Ada district or the Boise district, you didn't have something on the ballot, Nampa as well. But 46 school districts across the state had either bond issues or levies on the ballot. And the bottom line was we're talking about close to $300 million in ballot measures. Pick up on a few in this part of the world. McCall-Donnelly had a big bond issue pass easily up there on Tuesday. CUNA renewed a supplemental levy that will stay on the books for another 2 years. Parma, I think, had a supplemental levy pass. For our viewers over in Twin Falls, they had a large supplemental levy pass. Not every district had the same results. In Eastern Idaho, the Bonneville School District had a couple of levies both fail. A couple of levies in North Idaho failed. We're compiling these numbers and results as quickly as we can. So what you're seeing right now is what we have at this point, and we're working on getting more. So keep checking in with us during the day. We're gathering these up as quickly as we can. 46 school districts, a lot of numbers to gather up. So we want to make sure we get it right, but we want to also try to get the numbers up as quickly as possible.
The best place to go, idahoednews.org, or download the Idaho Ed News app. A great place to make sure you're updated with all of those numbers. Kevin, let me just touch on a couple of these, especially because I consider them significant, both being in our area of viewing, but also I found them kind of unique. And I think we can parcel them out just a little bit here. So the McCall-Donnelly School District overwhelmingly passed a $89 million bond issue. First, tell us what bonds can do, and they have big plans up there, and it all has to do with growth.
Yeah, let me correct the numbers a little bit. I mean, yes, it passed overwhelmingly, but we're talking about, for a small district, we're talking about a $33 million bond issue. They're doing some refinancing of an existing bond. They're doing some capital projects to deal with some overcrowding in some of the schools, to try to clear up some traffic issues at some of the schools. 89, the 89 number is the 89% support, and that's huge. It's difficult to pass a bond issue in the state of Idaho for any local unit of government, because you have to get to that 2/3 supermajority threshold. So quite often you see these bond issues fail. Quite often you see districts have to come back a second time around. 89% support. If you're a trustee in the McCall-Donnelly School District, if you're an administrator in the district, you have to be feeling really good about those results.
Thank you. I appreciate the correction in my numbers.
There are a lot of numbers flying around. Believe me, I'm trying to keep them straight and probably fumbling around myself here.
Well, and do you think that has to do? I mean, they obviously are growing there as well as here in the valley, but is that a growth factor? Has this been long coming that these updates to the schools need to be done?
It could be. I mean, I think McCall-Donnelly has seen a lot of growth over the past few years. I think that's got to be a factor in it at some level. I think the refinancing may have been, a factor as well, to be able to go to patrons and say, this is how this is going to, pencil out. It's going to, the refinancing, I think, was an attempt to kind of, limit the impact on taxpayers. So, however you slice it, to get a bond issue passed the first time around and to get it passed so easily is a pretty strong result for that district.
I also wanted to touch on Twin Falls because, as you said, Twin Falls passed a large supplemental levy, and they increased this levy. A lot of times school districts tend to run a similar levy as they had before, and they tell their voting public that your taxes aren't going to go up. They might even go down if we've had growth. And that's the way to kind of sell these levies, year after year or 2 years after 2 years. Twin Falls did something a little different this year. And again, I wonder if this goes to growth.
I think growth has to be a factor there. This is a district that has seen a lot of enrollment growth over the past several years. So the increase in the supplemental levy is part and parcel to that. These are there's such local results, and there's such variation in what you see from community to community. I mean, you see Twin Falls increase their supplemental levy, pass one fairly easily, 69% support. You only need a simple majority to pass a supplemental levy, so that passed comfortably. Bonneville, I talked about earlier, they were trying to seek an increase in their supplemental levy. They only got like 42% support, so they didn't really come close to passing that supplemental levy. The little tiny Hagerman School District also in the Magic Valley, they decreased their supplemental levy, and it passed by 2 votes. I mean, they I think it was 222 to 220 by my math. You only need a simple majority, so they barely got that, and that was decreasing the amount of money that they were seeking in the levy. So these results vary widely from community to community. So it's a little hard to draw too many conclusions, and I don't want to oversimplify what's happening in one school district as opposed to another. But to your question about Twin Falls, growing school district, growing community, I'm sure that was a factor in the request for an increased supplemental levy. And voters responded and said yes.
Kevin, the question I always ask you after we have a bond and levy vote is this the future of Idaho? Is this the way we will need to continue to fund schools? Do school districts ever get away from taxing its own body?
It's definitely the present of school finance in Idaho. And as for the short-term future, I think, yes, it is. because we track these numbers year to year, not just the election night results. We track the overall supplemental levy load in the state, and that number just continues to climb. And you still have 92, 93 school districts, it varies from year to year, seeking and getting supplemental levies through local elections. I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think that at this point, a lot of these school districts are saying these are essentials. They're helping to pay teacher salaries. They're helping to pay for curricular materials, for extracurricular activities, for school safety. It is I think it's a fact of life at this point. I don't see it changing anytime soon.
Let's hop over to the State House, shall we? So now we've had elections and we've gotten through that. The legislature is in full swing with bills regarding education coming out of committees still and hitting the House and Senate. These bills are in different places, but I wanted to specifically talk about two of them because these could have direct impacts on students and teachers and educators and families. And the first is the one being talked about, a bill to bring scholarship money to families. And this is almost a two-parter here, right, Kevin? Because there's kind of a part that's bringing this idea of the strong families, strong students grant back into the system, but also seeing if there's money for non-public school students. So break this down for us right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you broke it down into two parts because it is definitely a two-headed proposal, and one piece of the puzzle is a lot more popular than the other. The House passed this bill, and it does two things. It extends this Strong Families grant program that Governor Little instituted back in the fall, using federal money to provide grants to families to help them pay for home internet, to help them pay for computers, any kind of devices, any kind of technology that they need to learn from home and do study from home more effectively. That's a really popular component. I mean, if you go back to last fall, and we ran those numbers through the process last fall, so many families applied for that money that an extension of the program using some more federal dollars to extend the program, that's popular. People like that idea. What is controversial in this bill is a $5 million plan to create scholarships for non-public school students. And this goes back to a Supreme Court ruling last summer regarding these kind of scholarship programs. This is an issue we've seen at the State House several times in recent years. This time it passed the House over considerable opposition. You had the 12 Democrats on the House floor vote against it. You also had, I believe, 10 Republicans vote against the bill. And really the debate focused on that scholarship program. Critics say that this is essentially, it's a voucher program. It's providing public money to support private education. That's always been a hot button issue at the State House. I'm going to be very interested to see what happens with this bill now. Having passed the House, it goes to the Senate. It'll go to the Senate Education Committee. I think that's going to be a very interesting hearing as I kind of count noses and try to get a sense of what may happen in committee. It could be a close vote in committee. So we will see what happens with that bill. There's still time for it to get through the legislature. There's still time for it to get through the Senate. It has support in Senate Education. Lori Denton Hartog is a co-sponsor of the bill. She sits on the Senate Education Committee. I'm almost certain it's going to get a hearing in Senate Education. Whether it gets out of committee is going to be the big question.
Where's the money coming from? And again, as we're talking about these two different parts, and you're saying one's popular and one's not so popular, it's one bill. They're tied together. It's
one bill tied together. The continuation of the grants, that would come from federal funding. The scholarship program would involve ongoing state money. $5 million of state money would be siphoned into this scholarship program. So I think that's where the rub is.
And what about how long this runs? Is there a time limit on this in terms of when the money is given, or is this a year after year scholarship?
Grants are more of a slow term, a short-term program. Scholarship program would be ongoing.
Okay, we'll continue to watch what happens, where it goes. The other bill I wanted to talk about and you just say guns in schools and we should have comments pop up, right? I mean, but yet again, we have heard about guns in schools bills coming before the legislature over the past few years. What's happening with this one now?
Well, what's happening with this one is it's headed to the House floor for a vote, and that hasn't happened before. This is the third time around for a guns in schools bill in the legislature. Chad Christensen, a Republican from Iona, has been pushing this idea for a couple of years. This time, the House State Affairs Committee voted on it and voted along party lines to send it to the House floor after some really divided debate over the idea. You had the Second Amendment Alliance, not surprisingly, come out in favor of it. You had a county sheriff come out in favor of it, but you had the Sheriff's Association, that's the lobbying group that represents county law enforcement, urging the committee to vote against the bill. You also had the School Boards Association vote against this. It's a complicated issue in the sense that schools can already allow employees to carry weapons on campus, but what right now it is a decision that falls to the local school boards or the local charter school administrators. They have to decide at the local level, do they want employees carrying weapons? Do they want to allow it? What Christensen's bill would do is allow employees with an enhanced concealed weapons permit to carry in school with or without the endorsement of the local school board. So it really turns it into a very different dynamic. Now the employees would be able to carry without seeking the approval of the school board. So you got two bills going on right now. You have that one, Christensen's bill, that now goes to the House floor for a vote. The school administrators have a bill that would sort of tweak the wording of what we have in place right now, the process that allows school boards to decide whether to allow employees to carry on school grounds. That bill is over on the Senate side. It's in the Senate State Affairs Committee. We'll see if that comes out of committee. So in the next couple of days, we'll have a vote on the House floor, most likely on the guns in schools bill.
It's interesting to me, Kevin, because before the legislature even started, and you and I talked about major topics in education that were going to be coming out of the State House, one of the themes that we knew would be discussed is local control at school district level versus where the state and lawmakers want to step in. And we're seeing this, whether it be with vaccine control and opt-in, opt-out issues, sex education, opt-in, opt-out for students, guns on campus, whether or not school districts have the ability to open and close schools during an emergency order. The theme of the day is local control versus state control. And this just goes to it again with the guns in schools bill, in my opinion.
Local control is such a recurring theme at the legislature, especially this year, but really every year you have this push and pull over local control. And frankly, the legislature believes in local control except when they don't. I mean, the legislature is not very consistent about local control. And that was one of the issues that came up in the House State Affairs Committee hearing on this guns in schools bill. Karen Echeverria, the head of the Idaho School Boards Association, said, no, wait a minute. You as a legislature have been pushing back against the governor. You've been pushing back against the health districts. You want school districts to make the decisions about whether to open in the middle of a pandemic or not. This is a local control issue as well, according to Echeverria's testimony. You are already allowing school boards to make this decision about guns in school. And I should point out that you have several school districts around the state that have allowed employees to carry on school grounds. I mean, that's been in place for several years. What she is arguing is this should also be a local control issue. You should also allow the school boards to make this decision as opposed to taking the decision out of their hands and allowing employees to carry with or without the endorsement of the local school board.
I think that goes to the heart of my question.
Every year we have a local control tension that comes up at the State House. This year, I think more than usual.
Before I let you go, let's talk two other topics that have kind of gotten some news over the last week or so. Specifically, as you well know, we voted for 2 new College of Western Idaho trustees during the November election. And now one of those new trustees has already resigned. Kevin, what's up?
This was a fairly surprising and sudden turn of events. April Balin Mendoza, one of 3 new trustees who were elected last fall, really shifting the balance of power on the CWI board. She resigned late last week. The news broke early this week, and I've got to give credit to Nicole Foy, our friend at the Idaho Statesman, who broke a lot of the news here. Balin Mendoza resigned, and she explained it to Nicole Foy that she resigned because she's relocating. She's moving to Missouri to go to graduate school. But before all of that happened, Balin Mendoza called out a couple of Republican state legislators on her Facebook page, and that drew criticism from the Ada County Republican Party, who said that the tone of her comments were threatening. Apparently, according to Nicole Foy's reporting here, the resignation came before the Facebook post. But the bottom line here is this is a change in the board that happened fairly quickly. I mean, Balin Mendoza was elected only in November. Here we are 4 months later. Now the remaining 4 trustees will have to seek an appointment for that position for the remainder of that 4-year term.
I'm not sure we've heard the end of that story either.
No. And now we'll see who gets appointed to the board. Because part of what was interesting and really, newsworthy about these elections at CWI, you had, a real shift in the balance of power on the CWI board, and really kind of a real change in the demographics of the board. It was quite interesting because you had 3 women who were elected, not just 3 women of color were elected to the board. So you have this very significant shift in the demographics of that board. Now you still have the two. Cherie Buckner-Webb, the former state senator, was elected, ran unopposed. You still have the 2 new trustees who were elected back in the fall, but now we'll have an appointee to fill Balin Mendoza's seat. We'll see who steps forward and who gets appointed.
The other topic I wanted to discuss before letting you go was the fact that across Idaho, we were talking about bonds and levies rocking school districts yesterday. Well, school boards all across the state are looking for new superintendents. There are a massive number of superintendent openings in districts across the state, including West Ada, the state's largest school district, looking for a superintendent. But at least one of those jobs has been filled. But I don't remember this, Kevin, in any of the years past. We always have superintendent openings, but I don't know if this is a symptom of the pandemic. I don't know if you have any insight into that, but it's a lot of superintendent openings.
Turnover is a fact of life in the superintendent world, but yes, I do think you're seeing more, and I do think it goes back to the pandemic. The stress, the pressure, the decisions that superintendents have had to make, trustees have had to make, I think that's going to take a toll. I think that's going to have, veteran administrators say, maybe it's time to retire. So Valley View, their search is over. But as you mentioned, West Ada is still looking. Coeur d'Alene is still looking. 2 very large districts. Other districts in our part of the state, Middleton is going through another search. It does feel like we have more of a churn in these positions right now, and I think I think it has to go back at some level to the pandemic and the pressures that school districts have faced just over these past 12 months.
Yeah, you think about trying to lead a school district through something totally unprecedented, and my hats are off, not only to educators, but to the top level administrators who many times don't get the praise they deserve lot of times more, getting not the recognition that they probably deserve for leading school districts through this. It's pretty incredible. Kevin, what's on your plate when it comes to the legislature? What are you looking forward to? And do we start putting bets on when Ledge wraps up?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a complicated question. I think we're probably a couple of weeks away from adjournment of this legislative session. What there is now talk about, though, is with another round of federal stimulus dollars likely to come to Idaho, the House voting, the U.S. House of Representatives voting today on the final approval of the stimulus package. There's talk at the State House, there's talk among legislators of recessing and coming back in a few weeks to kind of oversee how that stimulus money is spent. If you remember, over the past year, that has been a real bone of contention between legislators and the governor about spending authority, as that first round of stimulus money came in last spring. So I think with that in their minds, I think legislators are thinking about, well, maybe we come back in a few weeks when that money arrives and try to have a little more of a say over where that money goes. So we're probably a couple of weeks away from an adjournment. Whether it's a final adjournment for the year remains to be seen.
Wouldn't that be fascinating? Just yet another twist to the entire last couple of years that we've been dealing with.
Yes, and I've not seen that. I'm kind of sitting here. I've watched the legislature now for more than 30 years. I don't recall the legislature recessing and coming back under those kind of circumstances. So it would definitely be different.
Kevin, we appreciate all that you're doing at Idaho Education News and the staff there, continuing to give us the most up-to-date education news throughout the state of Idaho. And again, if you want to see if your levy or bond passed or failed, idahoednews.org, definitely the place to go as they continue to update those numbers as they roll in. Kevin, I appreciate you being here for Making the Grade, my friend. Stay safe.
Thanks, Michelle. Stay safe. Have a good week.
You too.